Welcome back to the home front. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Today, I'm once again joined by Claire Atkin, who is CEO of Check My Ads, a digital watchdog for the digital advertising industry. Hold on, I'm going to start over because I got that all fucked up. All right, here we go. One more time. Welcome back to the home front. I'm your host, Reed Galen. Today, I'm joined by Claire Atkin, CEO of Check My Ads, who is a watchdog for the digital advertising industry. And that is her day job. But today, as I was told just before we started recording, she is just Claire, because we're going to do something a little different, guys. Claire is actually going to interview me, which we were talking yesterday about this, about, what should we talk about and all this. And we came upon this. And so, Claire, thank you so much for offering to do this. And I hope that you've had a healthy and restful holiday season. And now here we are. We've turned into the new year, and new adventures and new challenges await.
Thanks, Reed. It's good to be here. It's good to see you. I'm in a rest week. I refuse to talk about work this week because we're off. I finished knitting a pair of socks.
Oh, very
I
cool.
I'm here just
Size
on my
10 and a half,
couch.
I'm sure, right?
Size 10 and a half. I made them for you. And they're like lace, really perfect for you.
Yeah.
And I am on a couch today. I refuse to sit at my desk, but very happy to be here. Very happy to learn more about you, Reed.
Oh, well, who wouldn't? But no, I appreciate that. So yeah. So, Claire, just to give everybody a little better background, you and I have known each other for the better part of, I guess, a couple years. And it's all of these things where there's this band of people who have, looked at things from a purely political standpoint. But then there are folks like you who have taken a different approach, which is, what are some of the pillars that hold up what we have seen, that represent the worst in political communication or just societal communication, and really try and reduce or mitigate their impact on the world. But now again, we have to look forward, and it's hard to believe that I left the Lincoln Project 6 months ago. We launched it 5 years ago. It was an incredible experience for me. And I think that going back to 2020 and 2022, have a lot to look back on and be thankful for. But that we're at a different time and a different place in the country, and here we are now, just less than 3 weeks really from the inauguration of Donald Trump for a second time. And we did what we could 4 years ago. I think everybody in the fight did what they could, this last go round. And now I think we have to face the world upon us.
The most interesting, there's so many interesting parts of what you do. One of the most interesting parts for me is that you got here in a uh, in a really roundabout way. Some of
Mm.
us were born into a certain type of, thinking about the world. And, just recently you wrote that your late boss, John McCain, et cetera, et cetera. You have so many people in your network that you've known from what I would call your past lives.
Mhm.
And this is a week of reflection. And I know lots of people are reflecting on 2024, but are you reflecting on your whole career right now?
um, it's a good question. I think that if you had told me that this is where I would end up, I'm not sure I would have disbelieved you. Even though I grew up in the Republican Party, I was never a card carrying member of the GOP. My dad was an operative. My dad worked on Capitol Hill, and so it was what I did, right? And I was lucky enough, right, as so many things in life are based on luck or bad luck or fortune, to be going to school at the University of Texas, when George W. Bush was a first term governor. And I got an internship because I had friends who, were interning for him, and the rest, is history in that part of my life, right? From, an intern filling out, campaign finance spreadsheets to, being an advance guy traveling the world and working on a reelection campaign, all that stuff. See, I mean, Claire, it's 20 years ago now, right? It's hard to believe. And then working for Senator McCain and Arnold Schwarzenegger. And so, they were, I would say that, especially in the context of like, ideology, I think Bush was more conservative, certainly, than I was. But, McCain and Arnold, even today, would be my kind of Republicans, if that makes sense. But of course, that Republican doesn't exist anymore, except in a few instances that are without any real platform or real place in the party, and certainly no power within the party. Um, but I think I've always been a little bit too much of a uh, an iconoclast to be a pure party person, and campaigns are predicated, especially candidate campaigns, are predicated on the idea that you subsume your own personality and belief system to somebody else's. That's the job. I'm not offended by it, right? There are also incredible opportunities. They can be a lot of fun when you're younger. But, Trump was one where, like, forget it, right? Like, I wasn't able or willing to say that was what I was going to go along with just simply because I'd worked in the Republican Party for so long. But um, the decision to not support him, to actively oppose him, to leave the Republican Party, to leave all of that behind, as you said, to close that chapter of my life, I think was a little bit scary, but it wasn't as if I ever said I'm not going to do it, right? There was never any opportunity in my brain, and this is good or bad, to compromise on it and say, "Oh yeah, I could figure out a way to live, to cohabitate with this man inside the Republican Party." I never wanted that. So that was liberating. And then, in a weird way, this past November 5th was liberating too, because I spent 5 years trying to fight alongside the Democratic Party. First, look, I mean, when we started the Lincoln Project, we thought Bernie Sanders was going to be the nominee, right? We didn't know that it would be ultimately be Joe Biden. And so we'd already crossed those bridges, made those beds, whatever bad metaphor you want to use. And now I'm more liberated than ever because I could say, okay, well, yeah, I fought alongside Democrats because they were the best option we have. Um, but now, I think going into this very strange new world that we're about to enter, we really have to recap, reconsider everything as far as who we are, where we are, what we're doing, and how each of us can participate in that journey.
Reconsidering everything is, I think, where a lot of us are at. And we're sort of blessed with very specific skill sets. And I mean, everyone,
Mhm.
is blessed with a specific skill set.
Right.
So many of us are being like, well, I've been using a specific playbook that, has worked for me over the past few years, and now I'm adjusting that.
Mm.
Or maybe it's time to get a completely new set of skills to exercise new ideas, new tactics, new instincts. Though the thing that, I mean, I think you have this like magical set of skills. One of them is that you see things
Mm.
in a specific way. The read glasses that you've used that you've deployed over the past, let's say 5 to 7 years, I'm guessing,
Hmm.
have have developed a certain tense that has been very clarifying for many people. How have your read glasses adjusted?
Well, they're certainly not as rose colored as they used to be. That's for sure. Um, you talk about what we learn and what we look back on, and for us, for me anyway, the beginning of the most recent journey was to be quote unquote never Trump, right? Didn't matter who the Democrat was. It didn't even matter in the context of a Republican primary. If we thought that somebody could have defeated him, would have been fine with it. That was the job, right? The job was to defeat Donald Trump. Then there became this also became what was very clearly a pro democracy need, right? There needed to be a group or lots of people who there have been out there fundamentally defending the concept and ideals of American democracy. What I learned, unfortunately, was that's as much as I told myself that that was tangible for individual voters, it wasn't. And in some cases, the defense of democracy was something that Trump's voters believed as strongly as Democratic voters did. Um, And I just finished a book called The Oppermans, written by a man in the course of 1933 in real time as Hitler took office in Germany. And there was a great line in there about, there's great stuff for lofty ideals, and those things are important. But when it came to voters, like, they needed something more practical, right? And that sort of just, and I just read that line last night, Claire, and that sort of hit me hard, which was, okay, you know, I think you need to spend time philosophically and ideologically saying, why do we do these things? What do we believe in? Right. And there's a classical liberal, there's a progressive, there's a right wing, there's any number of places on the spectrum. But voters are often more like they need to be inspired on one level, but you gotta back up the inspiration with practicalities. And I think that's one thing that, I've learned is, if we're going to ask Americans to take American democracy seriously, um, I think we have to prove to them that either A, their choice didn't work, or B, that when they're going to participate in it, that it will make a difference, that it is the best option they have. Because I think we have tens of millions of Americans, perhaps hundreds of millions of Americans, who don't believe that the system really works, regardless of how it turns out, if that makes sense. Um, and so there's the philosophical, again, argument that has to be made, the thinking that needs to go into that. But then ultimately, how do you convince a voter in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin, to vote for candidate A over candidate B when tough times are tough in their town, and they don't think it matters anyway? And the truth is, year over year, it hasn't. So I think that we have to get back to first principles, and I think we need to re-examine our premises. We can't take anything for granted. I think that's the one thing we need to continually remind ourselves too: is we can't take anything for granted, and our imagination, unfortunately, can never be big enough.
This past year, we learned all of those things. Are there any things that happened over the past? I mean, it feels heavy to look
Hmm.
back over
Right.
this past year, of course. Is there anything or anyone that you felt was a source of light?
Well, look, I mean, I think folks like you and Check My Ads and so many other people that I've gotten to know, have been inspirations to me. And I have been doing this long enough, both in the Trumpocene era and before, that it's easy for me to get jaded. It's easy for me to fall prey to the temptation of cynicism. But there are a lot of people out there, and I've met dozens of activists and hundreds and thousands of individuals, and being out on the road this fall, I know it sounds trite, but it's not. And meeting individuals, that was really what, even as I saw, sort of the eclipse forming politically, that was the part that sort of kept me going, which is there are enough good people out there. There are enough people who care about their communities or their cities or their states or whatever it is, that if offered something different, truly different, I think they'd be willing to take a look at least give you a fair shot. But if we're going to go in, like we just talked about a few minutes ago, Claire, if we're just going to go in and say, we're going to give you more of the same, right? Well, he's bad, so let's just do what we've always done. Like, that's not enough, right? And frankly, voters deserve more. And I think, from my perspective, there are, to quote an old George H.W. Bush line that was pretty hokey at its time and still hokey, yeah, there are 1,000 points of light out there. And the question is now, how do we keep them lit over the course of the next couple of years, over the course of the next 4 years? Look, I think Americans generally and specifically and individually are exhausted, and who could blame them? I think that, not to get too far afield, but we still have not, as a country or probably as a world, processed, the PTSD that came from COVID. And so I think that, in all of the disruption that came from it. And so I think that, Trump offered the one thing that people were most willing to go along with, which was, I'm different. I'm the change maker. He is. But the chaos also often comes with ugliness and some level of destruction. I don't know what that word means. But I do know that oftentimes his history has taught us when guys like this take power, and they've almost always been guys that they may not be around very long because they burn themselves out, but they leave an enormous mess in their wake. And my thinking now as we go into 2025 is how is it that we're going to build that thing that will be there ready, that framework, that foundation? And it could be individual voters and individual Americans, it could be organizations, it could be infrastructure, whatever the case might be, so that when this period does end, and it will end, that there are enough people out there to start to rebuild. Hopefully not from scratch, certainly, but from a place where we've been thinking about this, and I think that's one where I think that you can and should utilize the skills you have. But to your earlier point, also, you asked about the Reed colored glasses. Say, call me a normative optimist, right? Like, I believe that the world can be better, but I'm not so blind as to not see what the world is, if that makes sense.
You believe that the world can be better, but you're not so blind as to see what the world is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Someone asked me the other day, do you see the glass half full or half empty? And I was like, well, it's half, and that's the point.
I think that's right. I think that's right. But look, I mean, I think we think about this stuff. I mean, I read a lot, and I think we think about this stuff in the context of finality, when it's really nothing is final. We have finite timelines in our lives, but everything else is blurred, right? Eras are blurred, epics are blurred, um, even decades and centuries, right? Did the 20th century really end, on January 1st, 2001? Or did it end, at the beginning of the iPhone, right? Did the 2010s really end on January 1st, 2011, or did it really end after Barack Obama left office and Trump came on, right? Is there a world before COVID and a world after COVID? I mean, I don't know if you and I were talking about this. If you read a book that was written before the pandemic, they have almost like an innocence and quaintness to them, um, that belies what was on the horizon or what was going on at that time when they were written. And so I think that now we have an opportunity and a responsibility for those of us that are willing to do this and are going to do this, to take that hard look at things and say, okay, what can be done in this moment? Because I think all of the talk of fighting and resistance is great, uh, but no one has yet explained to me exactly what that means. And yes, of course, there's lawsuits and all that other stuff. But I've been doing this long enough, and I've been studying, Trump and his people long enough to know that, like the legislative branch and the judicial branches, like they don't have enforcement mechanisms, right? Like it's not like if they tell Donald Trump to do something, he doesn't feel like doing it. He's going to do it because some judge told him to, right? And I think that that's pretty high minded. And I think that for a lot of Americans, they don't believe it will matter to them. And for the majority of Americans, Claire, here's the other part: it might not. And I think that's the other part you and I were having a conversation about is, in the role of democracy, is it the job of the majority to rule, or is it the job of the majority to ensure that a minority has a fair voice, unfettered by intimidation or violence or intentional silencing? The whole point is that the majority will out if you let it. It's the minority that is supposed to be allowed to ensure that clarity comes to light for individual voters or for the country at large. And I think that, you know, there's there's more. I still believe there are more people who would prefer a better, stronger, more decent America than not. The
Hmm.
problem is 5 million of those people stayed home.
Oh, I see. Majority, minority. Do you mean like like majority is sort of the average American?
Yeah, but I mean, I think it is, but I think that's the other part is like having to rethink things. Is when I thought about Donald Trump, and I hate to keep bringing it back to him, but there's a reason I'm doing this. Is this is a guy who has a coalition that's made up of 90% white people, right? that those were the only people he could really get. And yes, they were going to get the tailings of the Latino population, the African American, here and there. Um, he put paid to all of that, right? He put paid to the idea that we can continue to try and differentiate American voters simply by, a demographic box that we check. That I think and it's sad that like he's the one that had to teach us that lesson. But I think that for the average American, the average is average, whether or not you're white, black, Latino, Asian, whatever the case might be. And I think that we can't be so one paternalistic as to just continue to divide people when we're supposed to be the folks who claim to be uniting people. And second, that as Americans, even if we don't always agree, you and I could not agree with these things, that Americans do have a shared set of values that frankly are, you know, down the center at best, maybe a tinge center right. We haven't yet been a progressive country. When Gen Z comes fully online, maybe we will be. But there's a lot of young Americans too who are pushing back on a lot of things, and so I think that progress is the natural state of things. But once in a while, it probably needs a little bit of help too.
And when you were talking about minority, were
Hmm.
you talking about the folks that are not in that white majority? Is there a white majority anymore?
I don't know. Well, I think in a lot of places that are power centers, yes. But it wasn't so much a racial thing, so much as the if you look let me put it in the context of this, which is if the country is, let's say, 50.5 Trump and 49.5 non-Trump, right? Um, and those people who are non-Trump stand up and make their voices heard. Again, regardless of where they live or where they come from or what their background is, do they have the opportunity to fully express themselves and their opposition to what they're seeing? Or do we see a situation in which, because now an authoritarian movement has taken over, are those voices now increasingly marginalized and forcibly marginalized, which is they're pushed to the edges or pushed to the background through various intimidation tactics or whatever the case might be. And so that's my point, is not necessarily a minority based on race or gender, but a minority based on belief.
Yeah, the minority of the folks who were reflected in the vote.
Yeah.
I see. Read last night, I think it was last night, on the home front, your recent home front, you wrote, "For now, we should meditate on the things we do have. We can hold our friends and family close, celebrate the small wins of our partners, children, and neighbors. The winter solstice has passed, and the gray days grow longer, even if only 2 minutes at a time." You said this sort of in as a salve to catastrophizing, which is so easy to do
Yeah.
right now. Um, What are your plans for those things that bring you more light and calm and give you space to have perspective? What is your plan for 2025? Because I think we all need one.
Well, sure. I mean, I think personally, look, and you can appreciate this too, Claire, because I know you travel a lot. I spent most of my time on airplanes in 2024, and I spent most of my life on airplanes, at least my professional life. And yeah, I'm a road warrior, and I love it. I love being out and about. I love seeing new things and meeting new people. And certainly, as I mentioned before, there's no more uh, to me energizing time than, again, getting to meet individual Americans fighting for what they believe in or working towards what they believe in. But I'm looking forward to being home more, which is something that will be nice. I'm looking forward to not having to get up at 4 a.m. To make a 6 a.m. flight to go wherever I am. Now that's not to say that I will I'm going to plant roots and grow into the ground, but it also means that there's a level of um, to the extent that's possible, normalcy, right? Get up, get the kids to school, right? Do the things that need to get done, because everything else will be abnormal. And so I think to the extent that you can find those things, again, it's interesting when I spend time with my friends here where I live, I never bring up politics. If they want to talk about it, I'm happy to talk about it. But like the beauty of those friends is that I don't have to bring it up, is that I don't have to like dissect what happened here or when X said Y and all this other stuff. And so I think looking forward to more of that. Then I think professionally, again, as I noted a little bit earlier, we have thousands and thousands of individual elections in this country, the majority of which go uncontested. And I think that that's something that really needs to change. And I know that there are other groups working towards this, and I look forward to collaborating with them too, which is any race that can be contested should be contested. Any race that's not giving voters a choice, even if it's a choice they're not going to accept, is not doing right by the voter. And you could say, okay, well, Reed, if it's 50%, there's a reason. It's that there's no possible way that the opposition, let's say a Democrat in a heavily gerrymandered Republican district can win. No, that's true. But to my point about the framework, we need to start collecting people who are willing to put their names on a ballot line and others who are willing to help them run those campaigns, because both in practice and by osmosis, those will become the starting points for whatever this new thing in American politics will be. And I think that it's important to do that. I think also, in 2025, I got to do a lot more listening, right? I talk a lot. I mean, anybody who's listening to this, and you certainly know better than anybody, I'm happy to talk until I'm blue in the face. Um, but we do need to listen some more. I've thought a lot about this. I'm going to try and do some writing on it. Is I think that we need to spend a little bit less time on the X axis of American politics, who's left, who's right, and more time on the Y axis, which is I'm certainly guilty of spending far too much time up here at the top of the Y axis in the clouds. Individual Americans, and let's be clear, like these are still the people who are going to make big decisions on behalf of all of us, right? We got to be closer to the bottom of the Y axis, closer to the ground. And I think a lot of that too goes back to the idea that we don't have to think about things purely in a political context, purely in an electoral context, that there are a lot of folks who, whether or not call it the advent of the smartphone, of 24-hour streaming, of, again, post COVID lockdowns, a lot of people spend a lot of time in their houses. Okay. But we need folks to get a little bit out of their houses. We need them to meet their neighbors again. We need them to take advantage of the opportunity of being part of an active member of your community. Because as I said, this fall, I met a lot of those people, and they're out there willing to do the work. They do it often without any fanfare. They don't do it for political reasons. They do it because they believe in it. And so I think we need to start that conversation with a lot of these people. But I think that at some point, look, I'll be very candid, we have to start to insert politics into that conversation. But until and unless you've become a trusted messenger, right? Why do we believe that anybody's going to listen to you, on the Labor Day before election day every 2 years? And I think that's, because what happens then is that your conversation is unformed. It's unformed by any real, what I'm going to call quality information about the people you're talking to. And it all becomes transactional, which is either vote for this person because you'll get that, or if you don't vote for this person, the world is going to come to an end. And like American voters don't buy it anymore, right? Like they're just not buying it. And I think they are fundamentally, like I said, millions of voters stayed home. They're fundamentally uninspired. And I think we have to get back to a place of, making folks feel like, that their voices do matter, that, showing up is going to make a difference. And we've seen that, right? We've seen that now in 2016. A lot of people stayed home. Bad things happen. 2020, we just squeaked through. 2024, millions of voters stayed home. Bad things happen again. If we can't convince those people that should be on the side of progress and decency, right, and a broad based small d democratic America looking forward to the future, if we can't convince them to get off their couch once every 4 years, like we got a lot of drawing boards to go back to, Claire.
I feel like we are haunted by the ghost of Robert Putnam's work. Not Robert Putnam. Like,
Are we all bowling alone?
that's right. I mean, it's just horrifying how that book has been so uh, prophetic.
Yeah.
He said that more people are bowling than ever before, but that bowling clubs have taken a precipitous decline. And
Hmm.
so who's bowling and when? And I do feel that hobbies that we do regularly with people have been on the decline. I mean, that's certainly what his th hypothesis was years ago. I mean, over a decade ago, he's like, listen, this is going to be bad for society. I moved to New York a year ago
Hmm.
and am no longer part of a book club that I was in for 12 years, where we met every single month. And the
Hmm.
first hour of the book club is, what's new? What's new with your life?
Sure.
And I miss that terribly. I wonder at the skill set that is not easy to come by, where you can say, listen, friends, we're going to convene every month and we're going to bring a potluck of snacks
Hmm.
and we're going to talk about a specific thing, or we're going to go bowling, or we're going to go whatever. I'm thinking, because it's so cold in New York right now, I'm thinking that I should have a monthly gathering at the spa. But
Right.
whatever it is, whatever it is, it's hard to convene all of us. We're all so busy. We all have our families and our friends, and I think that it's easy to want to not commit.
Right. No, there's a great New Yorker cartoon that said, "How's Tuesday? No, how's never? Does never work for you?" Right?
Oh no.
Um, and that's true. I mean, I'll tell you this just in my own personal life. There was supposed to be a potluck tonight that some friends were going to host. They couldn't because somebody had to be out of town. And it's now like, all right, how about January 18th? No, can't do that. All right, we'll look for later we'll look for later, a little later, maybe in February or March. Claire, I say this, a little bit tongue in cheek. There's a really good chance it happens in like October, right? Just because, yeah, I mean, everybody has so much going on. I think that to your point too, there's a little bit of worrying about not being busy, of being still, right? Well, if I'm not busy enough, what am I doing? Um, Excuse me, if I'm not 100% online all the time, right? Am I even involved in life? And I think the answer is yes, you are involved in life to the extent that you want to be. Look, if your thing is online poker and that's your community, like not my thing, but God bless. But I do believe that there is a really important piece of what you're talking about, which is it is crucial for humans to get together in person. It is extremely important. We are social animals. We have always been social animals. And I think that recreating those bonds, and I think in a lot of ways it is going to be an act of creation or recreation, is going to be hugely important because right now, um, it's so easy to objectify one another, right? Um, and when you turn someone from a subject to an object, you fundamentally, you know, dehumanize and depersonalize them. It's really, really more difficult to do that face to face. And I'm not talking about some hokey, focus group where we have a group of Kamala Harris voters mixed today with a group of Donald Trump voters. And it's amazing, isn't it? How much they get along. Or some, silly like Heineken ad, right, from 3 or 4 years ago, or like all this stuff. Like it's all performative BS. What I'm talking about is people who are neighbors, right, who get together. To your point, it could be whatever it is. It could be a spa, it could be a book club, it could be knitting. For guys, it could be basketball or tennis or skiing or just sitting having a beer, right? Whatever it is, because those are the moments where we forget that even if someone was recording the conversation and it seemed inane, it doesn't matter. The point is that you're sitting there face to face with other people and in fellowship, and in companionship. And we need that. And I think that we become inured to the idea that, to go back to Putnam, right? I think there is a massive, loneliness epidemic, even amongst people who live in a house with other people, because it's, everybody's looking down instead of up. And that blue glow, its whole job, as you know better than anybody, is to keep you staring at the blue glow, um, and to keep your eyes peeled for a very small $1,000 device if you have an iPhone. For hours at a time. I know I'm guilty of it. And so, but I've also seen this is that, I've spoken to a lot of people, and obviously this is one-on-one conversations. A lot of people have taken social media apps off their phone. A lot of people have taken news apps off their phone. They've turned notifications off. And so as I say that, I'm just thinking about, like, weirdly, Claire, that also presents a real opportunity to say, okay, well, if you're not on social media, you could still be social, right? And social for real. And I'm just now thinking about that. So I don't know what that germ of an idea means, but I think there's a real opportunity because, social media isn't really fun anymore, right? At least text-based platforms aren't particularly fun. They're not particularly newsworthy. And even at their height, there were still far more people not utilizing Twitter or whatever it was than were, if that makes sense. Most people are just trying to do whatever it is they need to do, get through the day. But I also say this is that, going to places like Detroit, where I was able to speak at a Baptist church, let me tell you, I don't get nervous at microphones, but I got nervous that day. But you want to talk about community, right? There was that church was absolutely bursting with community and with faith and with joy. And again, it doesn't have to be in a religious context. But I think that the more people that can get together for the purposes of pick one, right? Whatever it is, I think is crucial and hugely important. And we can and should do that because I think that to turn crassly back to politics here, Claire, as we get past January 20th, things are likely to get uglier. I think people are likely to turn more and more away from that because they don't want to hear it. They don't want to see it. So now how do we take advantage of those people who are disconnected from one thing and try and convince them to connect to something else?
Last night on the phone, you said everything ladders up to politics. If you care about climate change, if you care about human rights, if you care about, in my case, libraries, very cool here, knitting and libraries and book clubs, um, everything ladders up to politics. Do you do you think that, I mean, maybe that is the ultimate thing, it comes down to governance, to who we decide to make decisions on our behalf for the greater good. What else is there?
Um, as I thought about that because you sent me a note about it this morning. I think I'm wrong. I think that yes, a lot does, but I think we probably need to start at the other end of the scale. It was what's his name, Breitbart, Andrew Breitbart of all people, that said politics is downstream from culture. I think he's probably more right than I was about the laddering up of politics. Of course, you know, I have a particular prism that I need to, probably smash on the ground and start over on. But I think that the culture does matter right now. What we've been talking about are social phenomenon, but cultural phenomenon too, right? We got a lot of lonely people. Loneliness breeds frustration, anger, contempt, jealousy, everything else, because you're looking at something again, either on the television screen or on a small screen, which is again all generated, to make you, as you know better than anybody, to make you angry, to make you jealous, to make you say, but why can't I have X? And certainly, look, that we have lots of millions of people in this country with real practical material needs. That's not what I'm talking about. But I think that, we have a culture of, we've been atomized, right? Now, some of that comes from all of the, American individualism stuff that even like an Alexis de Tocqueville commented on when he came in the 1800s. But the other part that he said, and I think this is where we need to get back to, is all of these people were individuals, but they freely associated to get things done together, if that makes sense. And now I think that we can't even agree on what we need to get done, right? And we're forcibly, moved, into places that we probably would not otherwise go because we hear from very few voices who are, I don't want to say in some cases extreme, but I think, you know, if you don't agree with me, you're wrong, right? Well,
Mhm.
that's a really bad way to start a conversation with anybody, right? And so
What you're
I
talking about is character.
maybe
What you're talking, I mean, you said that people will get moved. We can be moved and influenced by others. Um, and earlier in this conversation, you talked about the importance of needing to take space off phones, maybe even without folks, although with folks is also very important. I think that's so important what you just said, like our ability to get influenced or to be moved politically within an Overton window or otherwise.
mhm.
What are the I'm about to ask you a question, but it's a loaded question, so let me explain.
Sure.
10 years ago, you know that I had a bike accident
Right.
and that it put me in bed for a year. I hit my head and my brain just wouldn't tell my body to move its muscles. So I wasn't paralyzed, but I was pretty close to paralyzed. I couldn't leave the
Mhm.
house and I had to
It was
spend,
practically speaking. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean I was immobilized. I couldn't think, I couldn't count, I couldn't read or anything. And so I was divorced from my ability to be quote unquote productive. I
Hmm.
mean in any sense. I couldn't even cook,
Right.
let alone hold an interesting conversation. I was for all intents and purposes just dumb, too dumb
Hmm.
to do anything. And what that did is free me immensely from the idea that who I am is what I do
Mm.
because I couldn't do anything. And I'm still very grateful for that experience because I don't have that sort of desperate drive to connect myself with any sort of external movement
Hmm.
in any direction. And consequently, I also feel that I am sort of less movable than than I had been before because I know myself so well, because I spent so much time alone with myself.
Right. Getting to know yourself could be hard too, right?
It was very difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, very, very difficult. And my question is, how do we do that moving forward? Like, how do we make sure that we maintain our character? And what I mean by that is our integrity towards our own values, where we know right from wrong and we know what to do about that.
It's a great question. I don't know that I have a good answer because that's the other part too is that if to just to give you a political answer, right? In politics and campaigns, you're trying to group people together, with as few different things as possible because that's the most efficient way to scale, a group of voters that you need to vote for your candidate or your issue, whatever it is. But the truth is that it's really hard to get this stuff to scale. That you have to provide opportunities for people to walk through certain doors, and hope they walk through them. I have this bad expression that like MAGA buys in bulk, but it sells one at a time. And I think that's really true. Like we have a big conversation to have with lots of different people, but we shouldn't and can't be so arrogant as to believe that we are ever going to know them or their circumstances as well as we know our own, obviously. But I think there's that, trite expression, we have to meet people where they are. But it's true, right? There's a reason why those things become trite because they're overused because they happen to be right. And so I would say this is how do we get to know ourselves? Again, I think that's an individual journey. And I think if you're going to encourage people to do that, you have to do it in such a way. Again, I think like what we're doing right now, it has to start with a conversation that is not predicated on anything necessarily other than getting to know that person. Someone close to me once said, uh, when you meet someone new, ask them questions. Everybody likes to talk about themselves more than they like to talk about anything else. That happens to be true. And oftentimes, if I'm meeting someone new, I do what I normally do on this program, which is they don't know I'm interviewing them, but that's what I do because that's the context I need because otherwise I'm not particularly comfortable in a one-on-one setting with strangers. I can speak to a crowd of 1,000 people without thinking twice about it, but one-on-one, I have to find my own ways into having those conversations. And what you find is that, if you take an interest in that person or that group of people, they are more than happy to tell you everything you need to know about them, good, bad, otherwise. And they're often, as I think I might have told you, like when I went door to door, however many places, there were some people who were just happy, even not because someone had come to talk about politics, but just anybody had knocked on the door. And so I think even just the act of saying, "Hello, my name is Reed. Can we talk for a minute?" Is, I think, very potentially powerful. And I don't think we should overlook it. And I would say this, I would say that there are a lot of, people who you and I disagree with and frankly actively oppose politically who know that. They know that they are out there having those conversations. They are out there saying, "Come with me," right? They offer no barriers to entry. And I think that that's one of those things that we can struggle with, which is if you have strongly held beliefs, as I think that you and I do, you know, you have to put that aside just for a minute. I mean, I guess it's one of those things holding two thoughts in your head simultaneously, which is I'm going to talk to this person. I don't know them. I don't know what they believe in. It may turn out that they have beliefs that I find odious, right? That does not mean I'm going to say you're an asshole, right? It just means that in our head we can say, okay, I've met this person. I've tried to bring them along a certain way of thinking or get them to look at something differently. If they don't do it, okay, like that's too bad. But saying, I'm going to punch you in the face because I don't like what you said is also not going to help. And so I think that when it comes to character, again, it requires a lot of self reflection that Americans have not historically been good at, because we're the empire, right? And when you're the empire and you're the citizen of the empire, you don't, it's, you get everything, a lot of things come to you by dint of where your particular country or nation happens to be in the world. In a hierarchy, economically, militarily, or whatever, politically, whatever the case might be. Um, and I think maybe now is like in this, weird time that we don't understand yet, that maybe people will do just a little. Look, I'm not asking people to navel gaze, right? And I'm not asking for people to go and look for all the crimes that were committed by somebody else that they get blamed for. I'm just saying, like, what do you believe, right? And I think we have lost belief in this country. And I think in too many cases it's been replaced with nihilism or extremism. And both of those are very dangerous.
And consumerism.
Well, yeah, but that's the whole conceit of the country today, right? Like
Mm.
if you, I mean, think about this. And I know that you've got to run in a minute, but think about this. I mean, most of the American economy post-war was predicated on the idea that the average American family needed a new car every 3 years, right? Um, you didn't need a new car every 3 years. The car, if you took care of it, just like now, if you take care of a car, it will theoretically run for a very long time, at least a decade, right? But we had people buying new cars every 3 years, because we needed to churn out more and more GMs, Fords, whatever it was. And consumerism, I guess this is a question for you, Claire, is like, what happens when you live in a society where theoretically, right? I'm not saying actually, but theoretically, a lot of physical needs are met. That the television that I have hanging on my wall is the same television somebody much wealthier than me has on their wall, and someone who's far below me on the economic scale has on their wall. That the same TV programs are available, the same phone programs, and so where do you go now? And I think that's a great question, because now I think it becomes that material question, in a country like the United States, becomes a spiritual question. Like, what are you going to do with your time? What are you going to do with all that headspace you have? It can't just be buying another pair of shoes on Instagram, although Instagram has me pegged for shoes. Like, what are you going to do? And I think that's both a challenge, but a massive opportunity as well.
Yeah, I think that's so well said. Hopefully it hopefully it turns into, well, how good of a person are you and how do you exercise your values? But I'm not sure it will. I think there's lots and lots of distraction. I think it's very
Can
easy to say.
can I just tell a brief story? So I was at the grocery store yesterday. I was at Whole Foods, so I wasn't buying arugula, but I was at Whole Foods, and it's a upscale grocery store. And I'm standing in line, and there's a family. I live in a resort town, and there's a family ahead of me with two little kids, and there's an empty pizza box, like one of those cardboard pizza boxes on the floor um, in front of my cart, but sort of caught underneath this guy's cart. And I'm like, I pick it up and I sort of snarkily say, I'll get this. And he looks at me like I'm crazy. He goes, it's not mine. I go, yeah, but it's trash on the floor. You should pick it up. And he just turned away. Like, to me, that's like, again, I probably made too big a deal of it, but like, if there's a piece of cardboard stuck underneath your shopping cart that's clearly you've seen because you keep trying to get your shopping cart off of it, wouldn't the normal thing be, you know what? That's a piece of garbage on the floor of a supermarket. I should pick it up and put it somewhere or give it to someone. No, it's not mine. Right. I don't know why I bring that up other than it was just, to me, it was indicative of so much, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was in Florida a little while ago and I saw a pickup truck that the driver had forgotten to close it and his cooler was about to fly out and everybody was just driving past
Right.
and nobody honked, nobody let him know.
Right.
And yeah, I do wonder at what it means to exercise community. I mean, I don't know about you. I'm from a small town,
Hmm.
so if someone drops something, I'm running
Right.
to to give it back to them. And I mean, we have to be careful with trash because trash can be dirty and can make us sick or whatever. But yeah, I do want to live in a world where everyone exercises a degree of looking out for each other. And I know that that's naive, and I think that it's worth exercising just in general anyway. Not to the point of exhaustion,
No,
but
but I
or
mean,
overextension.
but I think that is, but to your point, though, I think that that is where community matters. I mean, I live in a small town now. And, look, community can mean many different things. It can mean, as you said, a group of people getting together on a monthly basis, or it can mean, a group of people who happen to live in the same places, who all share a common set of values or a common set of uh, difficulties, right, that are trying to come through those together. And again, no man is an island, whatever it is you want to say. But I'll promise you this: like, we're a hell of a lot better together than we are by ourselves.
Yeah, amen.
All right, well, Claire, you have to run. And I want to just say thank you so much for this conversation. You and I talk a lot, and I certainly am better for it. But before I let you go, I know it's a non work week, but I am going to impress upon you to tell the listeners where they can find you and your work.
Thanks. So I am. Let's start with me.
Hmm.
Um, Cat the Kin on all of the channels. It's Claire Atkin, Catkin with a the in the middle, Cat the Kin with a C, and I'm posting to Instagram more than anything these days because
Me too.
Twitter was taken from us. Um, yeah, I run Check My Ads. We're the digital advertising watchdog. Reed works in politics. We don't do any politics. We work in media. We're looking to get the ad revenue, the ads, and the data better handled because it's really out of control right now.
Hmm.
And the middlemen of the internet are the ones that are traffic controlling all the resources for media, and they're choosing who lives and who doesn't. So we think that they should be under better scrutiny, and that's what we do. Anyway,
And
cat the can and check my ads on all the socials.
right. As always, gang, you can find me on Substack at the home front. Also over on YouTube, you can find this show, the video of this show. You can also find me on Twitter, TikTok, and says.us. Says.us, the sane place for social media, at Reed Galen, on Instagram and threads at Reed_Galen USA. Thanks, everybody. I hope you will listen, rate 5 stars, share this with your friends. Claire. Claire, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Reed. It's good to see you.
And everybody else, we'll see you next time.